Schools in the 1970s looked and felt very different from today. From paddles in the principal's office to record players and risky science labs, the 1970s school experience was packed with things today's students would find absolutely bizarre. Stick around until the end as we uncover 25 unusual school things from the 1970s. You won't believe weird teachers were in those times, and the number 25 is the most shocking you will ever hear. Number 1, student desks with built-in storage. In the 1970s, classroom desks were like personal fortresses. The lift up top hid books and supplies, with some even featuring a cubby underneath. Students took pride in keeping them organized and occasionally left secret notes for the next occupant. Lift-top desks with storage started to disappear in most schools during the late 1980s to early 1990s, when schools gradually switched to lighter, movable desks and chairs to allow flexible classroom layouts and easier maintenance. If this felt odd to you, the next thing will make you tremble in fear. Number 2, discipline by paddle. If you were in a classroom in the 1970s, you might have spotted a wooden paddle hanging on the principal's wall and hoped it never had your name on it. A swat or two was considered a perfectly normal way to handle bad behavior, and often the threat alone kept students in line. Parents were generally supportive, believing it built character and taught respect. Corporal punishment was banned in state schools in 1986, and later the ban was extended to include private schools in 1998. Schools now rely on detention, counseling, and other methods of discipline. Now, the next thing on our list was unusual yet attractive for students. Number 3, lead-based art supplies. Bright colors and audacious creativity were hallmarks of 1970s art classes, but there was also a hidden danger. Long before laws were passed, lead was found in many paints, crayons, and even finger paints. Without anyone noticing the dangers, children would chew on crayons, smear paint on their hands, or breathe in the dust. Lead-based paints were outlawed by the late 1970s, and non-toxic, lead-free alternatives took their place. Students are now protected by strict safety regulations, and parents demand no less. Those carefree art sessions from the 1970s seem almost shocking in the modern era. And if lead in the art room wasn't risky enough, the next thing on our list took danger to the next level. Number 4, asbestos ceilings. If you went to school in the 1970s, you were probably sitting under a hidden danger, asbestos. It was pervasive, appearing in insulation, floor tiles, and ceilings, and while it was hailed as resilient and fireproof, it was actually posing a silent threat to teachers and students. Unaware of the hidden health risks associated with each fiber, they were surrounded by it for years. By 1986, schools were required by federal law to conduct asbestos inspections, develop management plans, and either remove or repair asbestos. It's a powerful illustration of how far we've come in identifying and mitigating environmental risks. Now, the next thing might make you sweat just by revisiting those memories. Number 5, no air conditioning. You may recall the frustration of trying to focus during a heat wave if you were raised in a school without air conditioning. The majority of classrooms in the 1970s used open windows and a few loud fans to circulate the air, but this was insufficient on hot afternoons. Surviving a full day in that sauna of a classroom was practically an endurance test. By the late 1970s to early 1980s, cooling systems had become more common in many schools, though many older schools still lacked full coverage. It is a luxury that did not exist back then, and looking back, it's hard not to admire how tough students had to be to survive those muggy afternoons. Now, the next unusual thing was what made students feel relaxed. But before we discuss that, I have a quick question for you. Which strange school things from the 70s do you remember? Drop your story in the comments. We would love to feature your memories in future videos. Number 6, unlocked doors in open campuses. An open door policy was more than just a catchphrase in the 1970s. It was a way of life at school. Doors frequently remained open, there was little security, and students could leave campus for lunch and return on foot without anyone noticing. Instead of feeling like lockdown establishments, schools felt more like public places. By the 1980s and 1990s, concerns about rising crime and drug use pushed many schools to close campuses during lunch and tighten building access, marking the end of the open, free-flowing style of the 70s. And if you think the door policy was relaxing, wait till you see the next thing on our list. Number 7, kids ruled the playground. There was little adult supervision during lunch and recess in the 1970s. Occasionally, only 1 or 2 teachers were watching over hundreds of kids. Concrete and metal playground equipment presented serious risks, with merry-go-rounds spinning quickly enough to throw children off and hard surfaces beneath tall slides. With time, schools started to increase oversight during lunch and recess. As worries about playground accidents Student safety and liability increased in the 1980s and 1990s. More teachers began keeping an eye on outdoor play, and students were prohibited from leaving campus. You think recess was rough? Well, I'm going to blow your bubble, because what went down in PE classes was diabolical. Number 8, PE's hygiene horror stories. Imagine walking into a 1970s gym class and seeing boys swimming completely naked, a practice carried over from earlier decades because of the bizarre belief that swimsuit fibers could clog pool filters. PE uniforms were rarely washed, with many students using the same gym clothes for an entire week or longer. The pungent locker rooms became infamous for their distinctive odor. Concerns about body autonomy, privacy, or psychological impacts of forced nudity were virtually non-existent in physical education programs of the era. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, schools began enforcing proper swimwear policies and installing private or partitioned shower areas. Growing awareness of privacy and hygiene led to stricter PE rules, making communal nudity largely a thing of the past. Well, the next thing isn't much of that unusual, but kids back then hated it. Number 9, teaching religious values in schools. Many public school classrooms in the 1970s prominently displayed Christian imagery, and morning routines often included prayers or Bible readings, despite prior Supreme Court rulings. Teachers sometimes incorporated Christian viewpoints into subjects like history and science. Evolution was often downplayed, with local community norms usually taking precedence. Mandatory prayers, Bible readings, and overtly Christian instruction in public schools were gradually discontinued by the late 1970s and early 1980s due to court decisions. Today's kids would likely be baffled, assuming religion in public classrooms is purely optional or completely absent. If you think this was bad enough, hold your thoughts right here. The next thing on our list might shake you further. Number 10, dangerous chemistry experiments. If you were in a 1970s science class, you'd probably be horrified. Students frequently worked with open flames with little safety gear, mixed volatile chemicals without adequate ventilation, and touch mercury with their bare hands. Chemistry instructors prioritized the wow factor over possible risks by demonstrating reactions that resulted in spectacular explosions. These practices changed by the early 1980s with strict safety rules, mandatory goggles, and regulated chemical storage. Schools developed lab standards, replacing the freewheeling, high-risk experiments of the 70s. The surprises didn't stop here, because from here on out, things will get more awkward, starting with the separation between boys and girls. Number 11, gender-separated class activities. In the 1970s, boys and girls were routinely steered into different classes and activities. Boys went to shop and girls to home economics, while guidance counselors often discouraged girls from advanced math or science. Boys interested in feminine pursuits faced ridicule. Over time, particularly after the 1972 passage of Title IX in the U.S., schools were required to provide equal opportunities regardless of gender. Today, students would find the old system almost unbelievable, as the idea that your gender could limit your education now seems foreign. Well, it might be one of the most twisted practices back then, but wait till you hear about the next one. Number 12, outdated and biased textbooks. In the 1970s, history textbooks glorified colonization, centered white male figures, and largely erased the contributions of women and minorities. While science texts had out-of-date notions, world history was frequently Eurocentric, leaving students with a very narrow, one-sided view of history and culture. Social studies materials reinforced racial and ethnic stereotypes that would be unacceptable today. Schools started revising textbooks to incorporate more inclusive, diverse, and accurate viewpoints in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Publishers updated their materials to give students a more comprehensive understanding of history. And if you think this couldn't get any weirder, then beware. It's nothing compared to what's next on our list. But before that, if you're loving this trip back to 70s classrooms, give us a thumbs up and hit subscribe. It helps us keep bringing these nostalgic memories straight to you. Number 13. Beeping classroom film strips. Imagine sitting in a darkened classroom, squinting at a flickering screen, while a little beep told you it was time to move to the next slide. Welcome to the world of 70s film strips. Even though interactive boards and laptops have taken their place today, only boomers genuinely treasure the quaint beep and moving frame. Film strips with beeping cues largely fell out of use by the late 1980s and early 1990s, as personal computers, VCRs, and later CD-ROMs and digital projectors became common in classrooms, offering more interactive and flexible ways to present lessons. If film strips were odd, The next thing on our list made things in the classroom much calmer. Number 14, in-classroom record players. For many kids in the 1970s, class meant the comforting crackle of a record player. Teachers spun vinyl for sing-alongs or quiet listening, introducing folk songs and classical tunes. The warm, scratchy sound made lessons feel cozy. This practice largely faded by the late 1980s and early 1990s. As schools adopted cassette players, CD players, and eventually digital audio systems, lessons became more flexible, portable, and less reliant on clunky vinyl equipment. Well, this isn't the only thing that provided comfort in the classroom. The next thing on our list is about a memory that we all cherish. Number 15, classroom pet corners. Pet corners in the classroom were a daily treat for a lot of kids in the 1970s. Although some didn't make it through the school year, hamsters, turtles, and fish required feeding and care, which taught responsibility and resulted in heartbreaking moments. Those tiny cages used to add coziness, happiness, and practical life lessons to each school day. By the 1980s and 1990s, concerns about allergies, student safety, and animal welfare led many schools to phase out classroom pets, turning these beloved corners into a nostalgic memory for those who grew up caring for their furry or scaly classmates. Well, this is where we take things from happiness to utmost humiliation. Number 16, publicly displayed test scores. Imagine getting a terrible test result and everyone in class knowing it. That was the reality in many 1970s schools. Scores, reading groups, and even fitness results were posted or announced aloud, turning performance into public pressure and embarrassment for anyone who struggled. Concerns about embarrassment, bullying, and mental health led schools to phase out publicly posting test results and announcing grades aloud by the 1980s and 1990s, prioritizing student privacy and dignity and fostering a more encouraging learning environment. If you think humiliation isn't the only thing that defined 1970s school, you couldn't be more correct. The next thing on our list will bring back some memories that make us happy even today. Number 17, Audi visual carts. The squeak of an AV cart's wheels excited many youngsters in the 1970s. Everyone's attention was immediately captured when one was rolled into the classroom, promising a TV show, movie, or special lesson. Today, built-in projectors and smart TVs make lessons easier, but nothing quite matches the thrill of that cart rolling through the door. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, AV carts began disappearing as classrooms upgraded to built-in projectors, smart TVs, and interactive whiteboards. The next strange thing in 1970s, schools might bring back some memories or maybe make you shake your head in disbelief. Number 18, metal lunchboxes. In the 1970s, lunchboxes were a school essential, often decked out with favorite characters or TV shows. Sturdy and dent-resistant, they could take a beating, and the clanging echo down the hallway when dropped was unforgettable. By the 1980s and 1990s, hard-sided character lunchboxes began giving way to soft, insulated bags and plastic containers. Schools preferred safer options, making the clanging lunchboxes of the 70s a nostalgic memory. And this wasn't the only thing that students used to carry to school. The next thing on our list was an essential item that every student required back then. Number 19, Trapper Keepers. In the 1970s, Trapper Keepers became the ultimate school accessory. These colorful binders had folders for each subject, a built-in calendar, and even a pencil case. Beyond organization, they were a status symbol, with students proudly showing off their coolest designs and bragging about who had the most stylish or rare patterns in class. As backpacks and simpler binders became more practical in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Trapper Keepers began to fade. While still nostalgic, the once must-have colorful folders were replaced by functional alternatives. Once handled with care, like your prized Trapper Keeper, the next classroom tool lets you slide your work into a machine that projected it onto the big screen. Number 20, projectors with plastic sheets. In many 1970s classrooms, these projectors were a step up from traditional overhead projectors, letting teachers display pre-prepared content on clear slides. Changing slides mid-lesson often led to amusing moments as teachers struggled to line them up correctly, turning even simple lessons into a small spectacle for students. Over the years, digital projectors and computers became the norm, and by the 1990s, projectors using transparent slides largely disappeared from classrooms. And if you think that was nostalgic, then the next classroom thing promised to save your fingers from chalk dust. Number 21, chalk holders. In the 1970s, chalk holders were clever little devices that let teachers write on chalkboards without getting their hands dusty. More than just practical, they added a touch of sophistication to the simple act of writing. turning an everyday classroom task into a slightly fancier affair. As classrooms transitioned from chalkboards to whiteboards and markers in the 1980s and 1990s, chalk holders became less common. The switch made writing cleaner and easier, rendering the once essential chalk holder mostly old-fashioned. And if you think fancy chalk holders were unusual enough, the next activity involving one of the chalkboard equipment would make you think twice. Number 22. Clapping erasers. In many 1970s classrooms, cleaning chalk erasers was a coveted job. Students took erasers outside and clapped them together, sending clouds of chalk dust into the air. Not only was it oddly satisfying, but it also gave kids a brief escape from the classroom, a messy, noisy, and strangely fun task. By the 1980s, clapping erasers disappeared as whiteboards and dry erase markers made classrooms cleaner, quieter, and dust-free, making the noisy, dusty chore ancient and cleaner. Quieter classrooms the norm. Well, chalkboards bring nostalgic memories, but the next thing would make you remember some things that you buried deep in your heart somewhere. Number 23. Vintage projectors. In the 1970s, old-style projectors for film strips and slides felt like time machines. The distinctive click as images changed and the warm glow of the projector light created a magical, immersive atmosphere, turning ordinary lessons into memorable experiences for students. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, these slide and film strip projectors had vanished from classrooms. Computers, interactive whiteboards, and digital projectors took their place because they were quicker, simpler to use, and enabled more dynamic multimedia instruction. Well, vintage projectors aren't the only thing that screams 1970s. What if I tell you about an unusual gadget from that time that we would love to have in schools even today? Number 24. Analog tape recorders. If you were in a 1970s classroom, nothing sounded cooler than a tape recorder coming to life. These machines were essential for music classes, language labs, and oral history projects. Pressing play, record, or rewind was oddly satisfying, and students learned about pacing and clarity in their speech while creating recordings, a hands-on lesson wrapped in nostalgia. With the invention of digital recorders and computers, analog tape recorders gradually disappeared from classrooms by the late 1980s and 1990s. These new technologies were more reliable, turning the once essential tape recorder into a nostalgic relic of 1970s school life. And finally, we have the most unusual activity that was conducted on school grounds in the 1970s. And what if I tell you that teachers were involved in it? Number 25. Smoking areas for students. If you were a student in a 1970s school, you might have enjoyed the perk of puffing in designated smoking areas, outdoor courtyards, or even indoor lounges without the fear of someone catching you. Teachers sometimes joined in, creating a strange mix of authority and camaraderie. Hazy rooms filled with smoke and secondhand exposure was never questioned. As health concerns and anti-smoking campaigns gained traction over time, student smoking spaces vanished. By the mid-1980s, many U.S. states had laws prohibiting the sale of cigarettes to minors, and schools officially banned smoking on campus, making it just a relic of a smoky past. Which one of these unusual things brought back your best 70s school memory? Let us know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with a friend who grew up in the 70s. And subscribe to our channel. This helps us bring back even more nostalgic snacks, forgotten treats, and childhood memories in every video.